news app from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm James Fernandez. The Ethiopian Prime Minister tells other countries to stop interfering as his forces prepare to launch an offensive against the capital of Tigray province. We'll hear from Mekele.
Everybody's worried what happens next about their family, because there's a tension, or what you call a cloud of war.
Also, coronavirus in the US, how the Thanksgiving holiday may make a bad situation even worse.
Despite how much we all want to see our friends and our family, especially after this tough year, it's undoubtedly only going to make things worse. We'll see the result of that in the coming weeks, and then it's going to be time for Christmas here again in the US.
Plus, could a long extinct volcano heat homes in southern New Zealand?
It certainly loses most of its heat within the first several millions of years, but it's that long tail that we're hoping to capture.
All of that and more after the news.
Hello, I'm Chris Barrow with the BBC News. France says it will apply its digital tax for this year despite threats of retaliation by the Trump administration. The controversial levy targets tech giants like Apple, Amazon and Facebook. Washington sees it as unfair trade practice and has said it may impose more tariffs on French luxury products. Andrew Walker is our economics correspondent.
It's a concern shared not just by France, frankly, but many other countries, that many tech businesses are arranging their affairs in such a way that they don't pay what they would consider their fair share of taxes in the countries where the economic value is actually generated. And so what France is proposing to do is to tax digital interfaces and also the provision of services to advertisers, and they're proposing to tax the revenue that companies get on that basis.
The Ethiopian Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, has rejected efforts by foreign powers to bring an end to fighting in Tigray region, describing it as unwelcome, unlawful interference. His statement comes on the day an ultimatum for Tigrayan forces to surrender expires, with troops poised for an assault on the regional capital, Mekele. Our Africa editor, Mary Harper, spoke to these people in Mekele.
I was told that despite this looming deadline and the vow by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed that he will show no mercy towards the Tigrayan forces, I was told that the situation in Mekele is relatively calm, that shops are open, banks which were closed have reopened. Many people apparently are staying at home, but I was told that they're not fleeing the city.
Reports from northern Kenya say Ethiopian troops have staged a cross-border raid into the town of Mayale, hunting for supporters of a rebel group. Witnesses said 10 Kenyans were dragged away, accused of sheltering members of a splinter group of the Oromo Liberation Front. The sister of the jailed Saudi women's rights activist Loujain al-Hathloul says her case has been transferred to the specialised criminal court, which tries suspected terrorists at the resumption of her trial in Riyadh. The Saudi authorities have accused Loujain al-Hathloul of conspiring with hostile foreign organisations. Our Arab Affairs editor, Sebastian Usher, says there's disappointment that she wasn't released.
There had been the hope among supporters of Loujain, and obviously that includes many international organisations, many governments, etc., that in the lead up to the G20, which happened last weekend, which Saudi Arabia was hosting, there would be a release of Loujain, the most prominent of his activists, and the others as well. That didn't materialise. Then when this came, this announcement of the session, again the hope was raised. Also with the new administration coming in the US, with the President-elect Joe Biden, a sense that the Biden administration may look at human rights issues much more closely.
World News from the BBC. Concern is growing over an Iranian-Swedish academic who was sentenced to death by the authorities in Tehran 3 years ago on charges of spying. Ahmadreza Jalili has told his family that he's been put into solitary confinement ahead of a move to another prison, which is often the prelude to an execution in Iran. Britain's government has announced it will borrow more than $500 billion this year as part of efforts to fight coronavirus. The pandemic has triggered the largest fall in the country's economic output for 300 years. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, said the economy had been seriously damaged in the past months by the coronavirus pandemic.
Even with growth returning, our economic output is not expected to return to pre-crisis levels until the fourth quarter of 2022. And the economic damage is likely to be lasting. Long-term scarring means in 2025, the economy will be around 3% smaller than expected in the March budget.
The United Nations says about 42,000 people have been displaced by a cyclone in northern Somalia. The authorities in the semi-autonomous region of Puntland, which was struck by Cyclone Gati on Sunday, say 180,000 people have been affected. It's been difficult to provide people with assistance as roads have been blocked by floods. The Duchess of Sussex has revealed she suffered a miscarriage in July. Writing in the New York Times, the former TV actress Meghan Markle said it happened while she was caring for her son Archie, adding that the loss of a child was an almost unbearable grief experienced by many but talked about by few. Buckingham Palace described the news as a deeply personal matter that it would not comment on. And that's the latest BBC News.
Hello and welcome to News Hour from the BBC World Service. We're coming to you live from London. I'm James Menendez. And we're going to start straight away today in Ethiopia, where international efforts to try to find a diplomatic resolution to the conflict in the Tigray region seem to be falling in on deaf ears. The Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has described them as unwelcome and unlawful interference. Well, that rejection comes just hours before his ultimatum for Tigrayan forces to surrender is due to expire, with reports that his troops are poised to launch an assault on the regional capital, Mekelle. So what is the situation there now? It is hard to get in touch with people in the city. Communications are intermittent. But shortly before we came on the air, we did get through to Daniel Bahane, the founder of an online news site for the region called Horn Affairs.
Everybody's worried what happens next. People are not leaving town in mass. There are still several services, shops, restaurants. Several of them are closed, like boutiques, luxury shops. But most of the basic shops and restaurants are open. There is not much traffic on the street due to shortage of fuel, and also because there's not much business currently. There's not much work. But people are walking on the streets. They are concerned about their family and what happens next, because there's a tension, or what you call a cloud of war.
And you say that people aren't leaving town. There have been some reports of people trying to escape the city. Is that definitely not the case then?
Well, there is no need to escape. Abiy Ahmed and the Eritrean troops are very far away from Mekelle. It's not like the city is surrounded and you need to escape. So I guess, I would imagine, several people would go to their relatives or to their family, because there is expectation that Abiy, he might bomb the city, the residential areas. So people are afraid. So some might choose to go out to the rural area or to adjacent cities. But the majority of people are here. There's no mass movement.
But people must be afraid, though, of what might happen in the next few days.
Yes. They are very afraid. Because in several cities, Ethiopian troops and Eritrean troops have been looting, raping women, and shooting indiscriminately. And the soldiers, they enter every place after heavy fighting.
And is there any evidence for that, or is that rumours that are being spread about what might happen?
For example, aid workers' presence in Shira, they will tell you the same thing. Shira is a major town near Aksum. Aid workers, they will confirm that to you. These are not simple rumours.
What do people in Tigray, what do they want? Do they want to be independent from Addis Ababa?
No, it's just self-rule, just the way it's written in the constitution.
Just one other question to clarify. I mean, from where you are there any signs of a military build-up, any signs of what might happen in the next few days?
Around Mekelle, there is no military build-up. Of course, I don't know from Tigray side, but from Ethiopia or Eritrea side, they are not anywhere near Mekelle. At least they are 100 kilometers away or something, and they are busy fighting.
So there are no soldiers on the streets in Mekelle, for example?
That's the interesting part. I don't see even Tigrayan troops on the street here. So maybe they are outside on the mountains. But normally you don't see much soldiers in the middle of Mekelle, and currently there is none.
Daniel Bahane speaking to me from Mekelle. Let's talk to our Africa editor, Mary Harper, who joins me now on the line. And Mary, just first of all, on this issue of people leaving, we had heard Daniel Bahane there saying that people weren't leaving the city, but thousands of people have left Tigray region, haven't they?
Yes, more than 40,000 people, according to the United Nations, have fled Tigray into neighbouring Sudan. So we definitely have got a movement of people. But it's interesting listening to Daniel Berhane, because I was also speaking to some people in Mekele today, and they were saying the same thing, that some people were staying at home, some people were moving to neighbouring sort of rural areas, but they said there was absolutely no mass movement of people out of the city, in spite of the few hours that they've got left before the Ethiopian federal government says it's going to launch an assault on the city Mekele, and that it will show no mercy, in its words, for the Tigrayan forces there.
Mary, just explain to us, what is the Ethiopian government's aim in all this?
Well, the Ethiopian government basically sees this crisis not as a war, which many people would describe it as a war or a conflict. They see this as a sort of, they say the Tigrayan leadership are criminals, a criminal junta is how they describe them, and they say that they're involved in a domestic law enforcement exercise, is their words, to dismantle them, to get rid of them, because they, in the eyes of the Ethiopian federal authorities, have broken the law by holding elections when they weren't supposed to, and according to the Ethiopians, attacking Ethiopian federal troops in Tigray. So they are framing it as a criminal problem, not a military problem. But the situation on the ground looks very much like a war, at least as most people would understand it to be.
The Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, of course, a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Why is he so reluctant to listen to outside powers and heed those calls for some sort of diplomatic effort, resolution?
I think because he sees this in a very different light. He sees this as an internal matter for the Ethiopians to deal with, because he sees these people as criminals, and therefore all calls from the African Union, the United Nations and others for some sort of negotiated way out of this problem and a ceasefire to stop the fighting that has killed hundreds and caused tens of thousands to flee. He just doesn't see it like that, and so he's ignoring them. And in fact, African Union is sending 3 former heads of state to Ethiopia today to try to convince him to negotiate some way out of this problem. But he says he will receive them, but he will pay absolutely no heed to their calls for ceasefire or negotiations.
Mary, thank you very much indeed. Our Africa editor, Mary Harper, joining us live there. We're going to turn to Hong Kong now, and further signs today that this special administrative region of China is moving ever closer into Beijing's orbit. Today, the chief executive, Carrie Lam, gave her annual policy statement, delayed so she could go to Beijing first, and in it she described the territory as a gaping hole in China's national security and promised to restore order after last year's mass protests. Here's a short excerpt.
Ill-intentioned people influenced by external forces have made use of the relatively complicated social and political situation in Hong Kong to deliberately mislead the public about the relationship between the central government and the Hong Kong SAR. In the past year or so, Hong Kong has experienced the most severe political challenges since its return to the motherland. One of our urgent priorities is to restore Hong Kong SAR's constitutional order and political system from chaos.
Ms Lam was addressing a half-empty legislature. Earlier this month, the entire pro-democracy bloc resigned in protest at new powers, allowing Ms Lam to sack any elected politician deemed to be insufficiently loyal. Well, we got reaction to Ms Lam's address from one of those opposition lawmakers, Wu Chi-wai. He's the chairman of Hong Kong's Democratic Party.
KVM has not put the concern of people in Hong Kong in her top priorities. They make use of all the legal proceedings to arrest, to prosecute opposition camp members. And what I will do is I will try to assure my younger generations in democratic parties can show to the international committee, show to the Hong Kong SAR government, show to the central government that people in Hong Kong have not given up.
Well, Anthony Dapiran is a Hong Kong-based lawyer and author of City on Fire, The Fight for Hong Kong. Anthony joins us now live from Hong Kong. Good to have you with us on the programme. What did you take away from today's speech by Carrie Lam?
Well, clearly Carrie Lam is doubling down on Hong Kong's closer ties to mainland China and increased political loyalty to Beijing. We saw this in her praise of the national security law for restoring order and bringing back peace to Hong Kong's streets. And on the economic side, a number of policies designed to further integrate Hong Kong into what's referred to as the Greater Bay Area, a number of cities across the border in the Guangdong hinterland outside Hong Kong.
We heard there from the Democratic Party, the chairman, Wu Chi-wai, saying, the need to tell younger people that this movement, this democratic movement, hasn't given up, that there's still life in it. But, is that true? Has the opposition movement effectively been silenced by the arrest, the national security law and so on?
Look, they certainly have been significantly sidelined, and it was a gaping hole in the legislative chamber today with all their seats empty. Significantly, Carrie Lam also suggested that they were going to be amending the laws on oaths such that any future political office holders or even civil servants will have an ongoing loyalty test applied to them. So anyone on the pan-democratic side taking office in future will not only have to swear that oath of loyalty when they take office, but if they are deemed to be breaching that at any time in the future, that may be grounds to remove them. So really increasing pressure across the board on the pan-democrats.
Yes, that feels like a big change for Hong Kong.
It is. Look, Hong Kong traditionally has had a tradition of neutrality in terms of the civil service and a tradition of multi-party democracy. A constrained democracy, but there's always been a role for the loyal opposition in Hong Kong. And now it does seem we're moving towards an era where that is no longer acceptable and nothing except complete loyalty to Beijing will be allowed.
Given the national security law and all that's happened in the past few weeks, has this had a noticeable effect on day-to-day life and people's ability to express themselves, if you like?
Certainly on the surface of day-to-day life continues as it always does, and business is being done and those sorts of things. But hovering just below the surface is certainly an air of tension and unease. People are aware that there are now topics that are off limits or certain slogans or phrases that are considered illegal. People are much more careful about speaking out, much more careful about engaging in civil society activities, and there's certainly a tension, and that's leading to people being more withdrawn and some people indeed talking about emigrating and leaving Hong Kong. So there has been a change in the atmosphere in the city, certainly.
And has international pressure made any difference, or does it just make things worse as far as Beijing's concerned, do you think?
Well, it doesn't seem to have changed Beijing's approach in any way. Beijing has really been very forthright in their policy responses this year, notwithstanding the international outcry. And perhaps, if anything, it's pushed Hong Kong's government and politicians closer to Beijing simply because people such as the chief executive, Carrie Lam, and other of her senior colleagues being subject to US sanctions, for example, it leaves them little space internationally and really nowhere to turn except back to the mainland for more support. And so in many senses, it could be pushing Hong Kong further in that direction.
Anthony, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Anthony Dapiran, author of City on Fire, The Fight for Hong Kong. You're listening to NewsHour. Still to come on the programme, after a series of high-profile rape cases, the Indian government brought in tougher laws and tougher penalties. But are they having any impact?
My husband's family would say, "You're a Dalit, like a dirty drain. We hate to even look at you." He would come home drunk and abuse me for filing a police case against him.
We'll have a special report from India coming up in about 20 minutes' time. Our main headlines from the BBC Newsroom this hour. France says it will go ahead with a planned tax on tech giants, despite threats of retaliation by the United States. The Ethiopian Prime Minister's told other countries to stay out of its internal affairs as his forces prepare to attack the Tigrayan regional capital. And a prominent Saudi women's rights activist has had her case transferred to a court that tries terrorists. We'll have more on that coming up in about 15 minutes. You're listening to NewsHour live from the BBC in London. I'm James Menendez. Time to head to the United States now, where it's the eve of the Thanksgiving holiday, and many people are travelling to be with family and friends. That's despite the risks for the spread of coronavirus, or rather further risks, because COVID is again surging in the US. The number of infections now stands at nearly 12,600,000. 259,976 people have died. Well, given that dreadful situation, a few days' respite is just what many are craving. But the handling of the pandemic and indeed the election earlier this month are straining some family ties. Barbara Platt-Usher reports.
The 2020 presidential race was one of the most divisive in American history.
And there's one more big political clash still to come. Your holiday dinner.
You made turkey great again.
What is that supposed to mean?
Political arguments are as traditional as the turkey at Thanksgiving dinners here, a popular subject for spoofs and satires.
Because everyone's mad, and it's going to get bad. So how we going to fix that?
And the past 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency have sharpened divisions.
How often do you talk politics?
We don't.
Very rarely.
Mike and Tony have been married 45 years. They used to be on the same political page. But Tony switched from Republican to Democrat during the Trump years, while Mike strongly supports the president. So, no talk of politics allowed at the Thanksgiving table, or ever.
It's a rule 24/7 with, that we are not going to talk politics with Mike.
It's, in my case, it's self-preservation, but that's fine.
And I've lost an awful lot of friends and more distant relatives that we aren't talking anymore because of Trump.
Trump lost the election. So you think if Trump goes, it will be easier on your marriage?
Yeah, but, I don't think opinions will change very quickly.
I wouldn't even say that this is settled yet. He's challenging it with a number of challenges that I think are extremely valid.
It's a political minefield. And for those who fail to navigate it, there is pain.
I'm sorry, I get emotional about this because this has completely changed my life.
Joseph will be spending Thanksgiving alone. He says he and his wife disagreed about the threat of the coronavirus. She thought he was overreacting by isolating himself and posting warnings on Facebook. In the end, she divorced him.
I can't believe that she would break up a marriage over politics and over something like COVID. I thought she would be 100% behind me on COVID, right? Wouldn't you think if you love somebody and they were trying to make sure they didn't end up dead, that you would be supportive of that?
It wasn't the only problem in the marriage, but the tipping point, says Joseph. He was a lifelong Republican and evangelical Christian who supported Donald Trump until COVID hit. The president's handling of the pandemic was a game changer for him, but not for his wife.
If there hadn't been President Trump, you think you would still be together?
Yes. COVID may have created some problems, but I think we could have gotten around COVID, but not Trump.
There is great concern about the possibility of the Thanksgiving holiday becoming a nationwide super spreader event.
A surge of COVID cases and deaths has upended the nation's holiday plans. Eden is a law student who's taken refuge on a beach with her mother Heidi because they can't have a big family gathering. Political squabbles have followed them there.
When she jabs, I jab right back. So I'm asking her not to jab.
They're hoping to have argued themselves out by Thanksgiving. And they can agree on one thing.
We both agree on peace. Peace in terms of our country healing. I believe that is the case, correct? Yeah. Hopefully that happens in a year. Or next Thanksgiving.
Welcome to my couch, I'll be friends now.
A report by Barbara Plett-Usher. Well, let's hear from New York now, and Craig Spencer, who we spoke to back in June. He's an ER doctor and Director of Global Health and Emergency Medicine at New York Presbyterian Columbia University Medical Center. I asked him first, how worried is he about Thanksgiving making a bad situation worse?
I think it's absolutely undoubtable that people are going to be traveling all over this country, and many of them, even if they're tested, even if they've been taking, good precautions, are going to be bringing the virus with them to their family meetups and are going to infect others. We know that right now we have a pandemic that's really raging all over the U.S., as opposed to earlier waves when we had geographic localization in the Northeast or in the Sun Belt or in Texas and Florida. We now have virus really everywhere. Nearly everywhere is seeing kind of record counts. And, the result is that as people move, they're going to bring the virus with them. And we already have a really dire situation. We have record hospitalizations. We've set new highs, 15 of the past consecutive days. We have over 2,000 deaths yesterday. We have case counts that seemed really unimaginable just over a month ago.
And what does that national surge mean for New York and indeed your own hospital? I mean, is all that you've described reflected close to home?
It is, but not nearly as much as it is in many other places. Obviously everyone remembers in March and in April when New York City was really the global epicenter of cases and we were having thousands of deaths a day. Now I continue to see COVID cases, but they don't make up the majority of the cases that I'm seeing. I'm talking to colleagues all over the country who are dealing with COVID, mostly COVID, sometimes all COVID. And although the numbers are increasing here in New York, it's not nearly as bad as it was before, and we're hoping that it doesn't get that bad.
And why do you think that is? Is it because people are taking more precautions than they did 6 months ago?
I think that that's true. People here put in place the measures that needed to happen to make sure we could kind of cut the spread. The majority of people here in New York know someone that got sick, and a lot of us know people that died, including healthcare providers. It's only been 6, 7, 8 months.
And is that feeding into that sense of foreboding, that feeling, look, we've been through this, we just can't go through that again?
Yeah, although, in the emergency department where I work, there are days when we see an uptick in the number of cases, and we're starting to see, similar to what we saw in March and April, the very classic, really sick COVID patient coming in short of breath with their oxygen really low. We're seeing a lot more of that now than we were 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. Here in the summer, we were having really just a couple hundred cases per day in all of New York City, and that's definitely increased. People remember what happens when kind of COVID overtakes the city.
Is it right to close schools?
I think it may be right eventually to close schools. I think there's a lot of indicators that we need to look at to know whether that's the right decision. We know that here in New York City, there didn't seem to be a lot of spread in schools itself. We still don't have great data on whether schools are a significant source of community spread. We do know, and I think that we should be doing everything we can to keep schools open. We can't have schools closed while you can still go to the gym and go to the bar with a bunch of friends. That's where the majority of the spread is happening, and we need to get our priorities straight.
And what does Thanksgiving look like for you?
I will be in the emergency department just as I am nearly every Thanksgiving, taking care of patients. The one different thing about this Thanksgiving than previous Thanksgivings is that, we're in a mask and goggles and N95 the whole time on our shifts, and sometimes we'll just take them off for a couple of minutes. It's going to be a lot harder for us all to get together in the same room and give thanks and share food together, but hopefully we'll be able to come together just for a bit, and I'll be quite thankful for the fact that we're safe, we have a job, and we're doing a job that we really love, taking care of other people.
Dr. Craig Spencer in New York speaking to me a little earlier. Don't forget you can get in touch and follow us the programme at BBC NewsHour on Twitter, at BBC James M if you want to get in touch with me. But do stay with us, we've got a lot more to come in the second half of the programme. Don't go away.